While I was on my journey of learning 3 different languages during different stages of my life, I did many things right, but I also made some mistakes that significantly slowed down my progress and killed my motivation at times. So in this video, I would like to share with you what I have learned so that you could hopefully avoid those mistakes and make your language learning journey considerably more enjoyable and effective. So let's dive in. Mistake number 1, you are not listening. Now, we all have this tendency to obsess in our head over what we are going to say in a conversation, especially when we are conversing in a subject that we don't feel very confident in, which is basically what happens when we are trying to speak and learn a new language. The mistake here is twofold. One, you are too much in your head, over-analyzing and trying to craft the perfect answer that you are not giving your brain the chance to just flow naturally. And number 2, you are not listening to what the other person has to say, which means that you are missing out on an opportunity to learn something from the person during this exchange. So, although it's hard at times, try to listen more and think less. Mistake number 2 is not setting goals or not being clear in your head about your goals. Now, if you are learning language at a language school, then great. There is already a plan that is laid out for you, and certain learning milestones already have a date stamped on them. However, if you are learning language on your own, then it's slightly different, and you might need to get very clear on what you want to achieve and the time frame in which you want to achieve it. Take, for example, the goal of I want to improve my French versus I want to be able to hold a 5-minute conversation in French with a native speaker by the end of the next 3 months. You will immediately notice that the first one is quite vague, I want to improve my French, whatever that means, while the second is specific, it's achievable, it's measurable, and it's bound to a time frame, all of which are important in achieving your goal. You cannot achieve what you cannot clearly define. And you might be familiar with Kydland's law, which basically states if you can write the problem down clearly, then the matter is half solved. So basically, if you can clearly define what you want to achieve, then it's easier to come up with a plan that will help you get there. Which leads us to the next mistake, and that is you don't have a system to achieve your goals. Now, what do I mean by this? So let's go back to the goal of I want to be able to hold a conversation in French for 5 minutes with a native speaker by the end of 3 months. One way to go about this is to say, well, I think I want to practice French, whenever the mood hits me, and I think I'm gonna use flashcards. Yeah, I'm gonna use flashcards. They say they're really good. Oh, and I'm gonna listen to music sometimes. That always helps. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. Versus, on Monday, I'm gonna do 30 minutes of vocabulary practice using flashcards. Then on Tuesday, I will practice listening for 30 minutes, maybe using a podcast or a show. And on Wednesday, I will focus on reading for 30 minutes using the new vocabulary that I just learned, and so on. And on the weekend, I'm gonna review all the new vocabulary and the grammar that I have learned during the week and go over it again to make sure that it sticks. Now, this is what a system looks like. You define the what, the how, and the when. Having a system has at least 3 advantages, if not more. Number 1, you stay balanced and efficient so that you're not over-focusing on one area, for example, where you feel more comfortable, like, say, reading. And you make the best use of the time that you have allocated. Number 2, you stay consistent. Remember, consistency is more important than intensity. And number 3, most importantly, is that you reduce the friction of actually doing the thing, because you already have a plan laid out for you and you know what you are going to do for the day. You don't have to waste precious brain power trying to come up with a plan for your day. Much of our hesitation to get into action is most of the time that we don't have clarity on what we need to do exactly. And having a clear system takes that obstacle out of the way. Speaking of flashcards, let's talk about vocab. And this might be a bit controversial, but hear me out. Now, flashcards is a great way, a fun way to acquire new vocabulary. And it might be tempting to learn as many new words as possible, but make sure that you are not just mindlessly memorizing new vocabulary thinking that it will increase your understanding of the language. It won't. What I would do instead, and what I found worked best for me, is to start with a simpler set of vocabulary and use it to build an understanding of the language, how it works, and give your brain the chance to build an intuition for how the language works over time, so that assimilating new vocabulary will come much easier. But most certainly, this is not me saying that you should always stick to a minimal set of vocabulary and not broaden your horizons. By all means, no. The aim is rather to introduce new vocabulary over time consistently in a more controlled manner by gradually perhaps increasing the difficulty of the text that you are reading, highlighting new vocabulary, and trying to always learn them in a certain context so that you have a better understanding for what the word actually means. So the key here is that you learn vocabulary with context, and two, to go over them and practice using them. This is very important, and don't just memorize them. This really never works. Now coming to mistake number 5, which is that you are translating in your head too much instead of thinking in your target language. I found myself doing that a lot when I was learning German during my graduate studies. Somehow German lends itself to direct translation. But I feel that German speakers also do the same, so that they translate the literal German phrases into English. For example, they would translate "Wir sehen uns" to "we see us" next week, where the proper English phrase would probably be "we see each other next week" or simply "see you next week." But I didn't find myself doing that during my short-lived fling with Japanese. I was actually really able to think in Japanese. So I feel like this happens more easily if the language you are learning is closer to a language that you already know. But let me know what you think. Mistake number 6 is that you are too shy. Now, let's face it, there is no avoiding it. If you are going to learn a language, then you need to speak it. You need to practice speaking, because there are basically 2 parts to speaking fluently, or just being able to express yourself in a language. One is being able to put your thoughts into words, where vocabulary and grammar are relevant, and the other is actually being able to articulate what you are trying to say out loud. And for this, you need to train your tongue muscle to make the sounds and the intonation of the language that you are learning. They are not gonna simply make themselves when you try to speak. What will happen instead is that you will start speaking, then you will hear that what you are saying does not sound right, and you begin to stumble and stutter, even though in your head you have built the perfect sentence with the perfect grammar and everything about it was right, but you just couldn't get it out. Practicing does not only mean that you have to have somebody who speaks the language and you have access to them and can speak to them 24/7. But you can effectively train your tongue muscle to use the language by simply reading a text out loud and trying to imitate native speakers. For example, by watching shows and listening to podcasts. Trust me, training your tongue to use the language will make all the difference. Because now when you speak, you will not be overly preoccupied with how you are sounding, because you already got that under control. But still, ideally, try to practice at least once a week with a native speaker. For example, you can hire a teacher for as little as $5 per hour on italki or Preply. It's really worth it, and it really makes a difference. And don't be shy. And mistake number 7 is that you translate words into your native language. Instead, try using a dictionary that explains the meaning of the word in your target language. This not only forces you to think in that language, but also could capture potential nuance that exists in the language but can potentially not exist in your native language or whatever language you are trying to translate to. And the plus, you will always find synonyms listed, so you can simultaneously perhaps pick up a similar word or two. Now, of course, in the beginning, you will need to translate to a language that you understand. But once you reach a certain level of proficiency, try to take it up a notch. Avoiding those mistakes is crucial to ensure sustained progress. But what's more important is implementing strategies and tips that can really accelerate your progress, which is what I talk about in this video, so feel free to check it out if you're interested. And I'll see you there.